Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. The story of Black Sabbath starts in the town of Birmingham, a tough industrial city in the heart of the English Midlands. The city had been bombed heavily during the Birmingham Blitz in World War II and was filled with the sounds and smells of heavy industry and factories. This bleak, industrialized landscape was a far cry from the peace, love, and groovy vibe that the hippies from San Francisco sang about, and social class divisions were entrenched in the society. However, four men from this city would come together to change the fundamental basis of rock music. This is the story of how Black Sabbath came together as a band. John Michael Osborne was born at the hospital in Marston Green on December 3rd, 1948. Soon the family moved to the Ashton district of Birmingham. Osborne was the fourth oldest of six children. His mother worked at the Lucas factory, which manufactured parts for the motor and aerospace industries, and his father was a toolmaker at the General Electric Company. Despite both his parents being employed, poverty was a reality for the Osborne family. Their home did not have a functioning bathroom, but rather an outhouse in the backyard. Osborne struggled with both undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia, making school very difficult for him. And Ozzy's childhood was quite rough. He was sexually molested by older bullies at his school when he was 11, and he states during his early teens he attempted suicide more than once. At school, he was given the moniker Ozzy by his classmates, so maybe he did not steal the name from the Coven bass player. Ozzy dropped out of school at 15 and worked on a variety of jobs, including construction, apprenticeships in both plumbing and toolmaking, testing out car horns, and killing animals in a slaughterhouse. Unfortunately, he ended up getting arrested for burglary and spent 6 weeks in prison because his dad refused to pay the fine and thought that the punishment would teach young Osborne a lesson. But Ozzy had an artistic side. He acted in school plays as a kid, and his life changed forever when he heard the song She Loves You by the Beatles. He knew from that point on he wanted to be a musician. Terence Michael Joseph Butler was born on July 17, 1949 in Birmingham, England. He grew up in an Irish working-class family of 7 children, and like Ozzy's family, they dealt with poverty. Butler took an interest in Aleister Crowley, and he eventually stopped attending the Catholic Church in his late teens. He was also inspired by the Beatles, especially John Lennon, so he took up rhythm guitar and started his first band, Rare Breed, in 1967. He took on the name Geezer Butler. The vocalist who soon joined the band was in fact Ozzy Osbourne. Soon the band would break up, but would reunite in another band called Polka Tuck with 2 other important members. Anthony Frank Iommi Jr. was born in Birmingham on February 19, 1948. He was the son of Italian immigrants. His mother ran a shop while his father worked as a carpenter. He actually knew Ozzy at school and may have given Ozzy a real thumping at one point on the schoolyard. To deal with the gang issues in the city, he took up judo, karate, and boxing. But he also developed an interest in music and took up guitar after deciding the drums were too noisy to play. He wanted to play in the style of Hank Marvin from the Shadows. He began playing in local bands until tragedy struck at age 17. When working his last shift as a sheet metal worker, he accidentally cut off the tips of his middle and ring fingers on his right hand. He was told that he would never play guitar again, but Iommi refused to accept the situation. He's left-handed, so he would be strumming with his left hand and need to use his fingers on his right hand. First of all, he was introduced to the Belgian Romany jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. Reinhardt had accidentally burned his ring and little finger on his left hand and had to create a 2-finger technique to play with. You can hear the influence of Reinhardt on Iommi's playing, particularly in his solos. Iommi also created false tips for his fingers by melting down a dishwashing liquid bottle and creating the tips. He also strung the guitar with banjo strings, which were lighter than guitar strings. Iommi played in several different bands, such as the Rocking Cheverettes, the Birds and the Bees, the Rest, and Mythology. It was in the bands The Rest and Mythology that Iommi played with Bill Ward. William Thomas Ward was born on May 5, 1948 in Birmingham. He had a rich exposure to jazz music as a child and took up the drums. In Ward's playing, one can hear the influence of jazz drumming Greeks like Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, and Louis Bellson. He was soon exposed to blues, rock and roll, and rhythm and blues, and incorporated those influences to his style as well. One of the key factors in what would become Sabbath's sound was the funky groove of Ward's playing. He met Tony Iommi when he played in The Rest and would later join Iommi in the blues-based band Mythology. The band would break up and Ward and Iommi would see an ad saying, "Ozzy Zig requires gig, has own PA." Ozzy joined up with his former classmate and Ward. Butler, who had played with Ozzy in Rare Breed, was brought in, along with slide guitarist Jimmy Phillips and saxophonist Alan Clark. The band was called the Polka Tuck Blues Band. Phillips and Clark were let go, and the band was now just called Polka Tuck. In September 1968, they renamed the band Earth. Earth got regular gigs and were able to record 3 songs: The Rebel, When I Came Down, and A Song for Jim. The last song was a ploy for them to get Jim Simpson, who was a local rock band manager and had started a new club called Henry's Blues House. After a successful gig at the club, Simpson became Earth's manager. Listening to the Earth's demos, you can hear the band trying to find their sound. There are elements of the Beatles, blues, jazz, and some of the heavy guitar sound that the band would be known for. However, the band's future was possibly in jeopardy when Iommi was offered to be the guitarist in the up-and-coming band Jethro Tull in December 1968. After going down to London and playing a few gigs, and even appearing on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, though Iommi and the rest of Jethro Tull were not actually plugged in but were lip-syncing to a pre-recorded track, Iommi returned to Birmingham and to Earth. But Iommi had learned a lot from his brief time in Tull. The band would wake up early and spend the days rehearsing and promoting themselves. So Iommi brought this work ethic back to the band Earth. Now, Earth hit another snag. Apparently there was another band operating in the UK called Earth, and Ozzy's band found this out the hard way. When the band booked a number of gigs, the fans of the other Earth band showed up and wanting to see that band. After being booed off the stage a few times, they decided to change their name, which was fine with Ozzy, who always hated the name Earth. Now, here is the controversy. Iommi states that they were not inspired by the American band Coven, see this controversy in episode 1, but rather by the 1963 film Black Sabbath starring Boris Karloff, that had been recently seen by Geezer's brother. The band had really developed a fascination with horror films, as there was a cinema across the street that would regularly show horror films, and did show the film Black Sabbath. The band were surprised that people paid money to be scared. Well, what about a band that played scary music? The band would start taking the sounds of Hendrix, Cream, Blue Shear, Grand Funk Railroad, and Led Zeppelin. They upped the distortion and mixed it with a horror aesthetic. Black Sabbath played their first gig on August 30th, 1969. The public got further exposed to the band when they got a chance to be on John Peel's Top Gear show, where they played Black Sabbath, NIB, Behind the Wall of Sleep, and Sleeping Village. They managed to get signed to Philips Records and recorded a single called Evil Woman, which was a song by the American blues rock band Crow. In October 1969, they recorded their debut album live in Regent Studios in London in less than 2 days. Ozzy was put in one room to do vocals, and the band played live in another room, and everything was recorded at the same time. The album would eventually be released on Friday the 13th, 1970, at least in the UK, and then on June 1st of the same year in the US. And this album was a game changer. Yes, Hendrix, Blue Cher, Led Zeppelin, and Grand Funk Railroad had made some heavy music, but not on this level. This album truly was the birth of heavy metal. The album starts out with the ominous sounds of a rainstorm and distant ringing of bells, before the listener is completely awakened by the heavy, sinister, dark tritone riff of Iommi, which was inspired by Gustav Holst's Mars Bringer of War from the Planet Suite. I don't think a darker, more menacing song has ever been written. The lyrics were written by Ozzy based on a story told to him by Butler. Apparently, Butler had painted the walls of his apartment black and put up upside-down crosses and even pictures of the devil. He started reading this book on the occult that had been given by Ozzy that was written in Latin. According to Butler, he woke up in the middle of the night to see a black figure at the bottom of his bed. The figure disappeared and the book had been moved and was no longer in the place where Butler had put it. This is the basis for the opening lines. What is this that stands before me? Ozzy describes a fearful scene where Satan is smiling, leading him to yell, "Oh no, please God help me." A charging riff picks up in the last quarter of the song. The whole track ends in complete metallic cacophony. While the song was blues-based in many ways, the dark, distorted guitars overshadow any sense of traditional blues tone, creating an entirely new sound. The menacing heavy sound is played throughout the entire album. There are no ballads here. The next track, The Wizard, has Ozzy playing harmonica next to the hard-charging riff. After that, Behind the Wall of Sleep, inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft story of the same name, is both jammy and heavy. When this track ends, Geezer Butler gets a chance to show off his bass skills on Basically, before launching into the main riff of N.I.B., also known as Nativity in Black. It was actually named after Bill Ward's nib of a beard. This riff-heavy song is the highlight of the album and tells the story of the devil falling in love with a mortal human woman. Now, after this, UK listeners got The Evil Woman as the next track, which was actually the closest Sabbath got to pop until 1978's Never Say Die. US listeners got the heavy yet funky and jazzy Wicked World. These tracks are followed up by Briefly Quiet, with a jaw harp played by producer Roger Bain, before turning into a heavy jam known as Sleeping Village, which then morphs into Warning. The track was actually written by Ainsley Dunbar, which would be pure blues if the volume was not turned up so high. The US version gives names to certain instrumental sections of the longer tracks with names like Wasp and A Bit of Finger. This album captures the band at their rawest and has aged so incredibly well. There are no overdubs, just four guys really going for it. The album almost seems to be separate from the rest of their catalog, as their access to recording and studio trickery increased over the course of their career. The album's cover shows a witch-like woman, later to be revealed as Louisa Livingstone, standing in front of the Maple Durham watermill in Oxfordshire on the Thames River. Still to this day, I have not seen an album cover as eerie as this one. But the critics were absolutely harsh. The infamous rock critic Lester Bangs wrote, "A shuck. Despite the murky songs and some inane lyrics that sound like Vanilla Fudge playing doggerel tribute to Aleister Crowley, the album has nothing to do with spiritualism, the occult, or anything much except stiff recitations of cream cliches. It was described as the worst of the psychedelic era indulgences." And since the term heavy metal was not really being used, Sabbath was kind of seen as a hard psychedelic rock band. But The record-buying public was digging this sound despite the panning by the critics. It reached 23 on the Billboard charts and stayed there for a year, selling over 1 million copies. The band toured extensively throughout Britain and Europe in 1970. The record company chose to put images of upside-down crosses on the inside of the album cover. This ended up attracting Satanists and witches to their concerts, and one group would even put a curse on their band. Ozzy's father made crosses for each band member to wear to protect them from these evil influences. The band went back into the studio to record their second album in June of 1970. Like with the first album, the recording process was quick and over 2 days from June 16th to 18th. The songs were developed from the long jam sessions that the band did during their numerous live gigs. Again, Black Sabbath produced a classic album. The opening track, War Pigs, was supposed to be the title track, but the band decided it was too controversial, being that the Vietnam War was still going strong, so the title of the album was taken from the track Paranoid. In fact, the original title for War Pigs was going to be Walpurgis, which is apparently the satanic version of Christmas, but that was scrapped. In fact, the album dealt with other themes like war, drug addiction, and revenge, rather than the darker devil-themed tracks that were on the debut. The track War Pigs starts out with similar bomb siren sounds from Grand Funk Railroad's Paranoid track, along with the band playing heavy riffs. This track showcases the band at their best, with Ozzy doing call and response with the band, for the band takes off with amazing groove-heavy riff. The band is funky here, and the song goes all over the place. The title track is next. Paranoid was written as an afterthought because the band did not have enough material for the album. Ironically, this became one of their best-known songs and was released as a single. This short song, by Sabbath standards, actually reached number 4 on the UK charts. However, Geezer Butler worried that the song sounded too much like Led Zeppelin's Communication Breakdown, and they would get called out on it. After this is the very mellow track, Planet Caravan. Ozzy cranked the treble and the vibration effect on the speaker to give his voice an ethereal quality. And this would be followed by Iron Man. Starting out with a slow pound of drums, an evil moaning guitar, and Ozzy declaring in distorted voice, "I am Iron Man." Then there is one of the most memorable rock riffs of all time. It is a toss-up between Iron Man and Smoke on the Water for the most headbanging archetypal metal riff. The lyrics, written by Geezer Butler, are about a man who goes to the future and witnesses the apocalypse. After returning to the present, he tries to warn everybody, but a magnetic field turns him into steel. Humanity ignores him, so he takes revenge on humanity by creating the apocalypse that he had seen in the future in the present. As Henry Rollins states, "When I heard Iron Man, high school became powerless over me after that. This is true outsider music." Side 2 of the album starts out with Electric Funeral, where Iommi creates a nasty riff using a wah-wah pedal. The funky and subdued, at least at the beginning of the track, Hand of Doom, deals with American soldiers coming back from Vietnam and becoming heroin addicts. The song merges into the instrumental track Rat Salad, where Ward gets a chance to show off his incredible drumming. And then the album ends with the epic and driving Fairies Wear Boots. The lyrics written by Ozzy are based on a time where a bunch of skinheads made fun of him for having long hair, and is merged along with bad experiences he had with psychedelic drugs. Paranoid was very successful and reached number 12 on the US charts by March 1971. They toured the US, and on one of their first gigs, they blew out the PA system, which was at Glassboro College in New Jersey. They also blew out the electricity in most of the neighborhood as well. This made Ozzy cry and claimed that he hated America and wanted to go home. At their various gigs, they were followed by both Satanists and religious freaks. One religious fanatic painted a red cross on their dressing room door. The band experiences drugs and groupies at a level they had never seen before. These excesses would soon catch up with them on subsequent tours. 1970 had a lot of heavy albums. Sabbath unleashed 2 albums of heavy music, but several other bands did as well. Deep Purple had released 3 psychedelic and progressive rock albums in the late 60s, and even had a hit song called Hush. After the departure of singer Rod Evans and bassist Nick Simper, and the arrival of singer Ian Gillan and bassist Roger Glover, they released an album with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Then they changed their sound and turned up the volume in a serious way. Guitarist Ritchie Blackmore played electric blues combined with a neoclassical approach and created some seriously unique, fiery guitar solos. Ian Gillan had a screaming banshee vocals. Drummers Ian Pace and Roger Glover created a tight rhythm section, and keyboardist John Lord added pounding organ passages to create an overall thicker sound. The album with this new sound, In Rock, was released in June 1970 and had contained heavy blazing songs like Speed King, Into the Fire, and Hard Loving Man. Another band that combined the heavy guitar with the organ was Uriah Heep. Based out of London, Heap's debut, Very Heavy, Very Humble, was released the same month as In Rock. The opening track, Gypsy, merges the heavy guitar and organ in a kind of psychedelic intensity. Also taking this approach was Lucifer's Friend, a band fronted by an English singer, John Lawton, and backed by a German band. Their debut album came out in November 1970 and had a very eerie cover. Another very eerie sounding album was the sophomore album by Atomic Rooster, Death Walks Behind You, which was also released in November 1970. Over in America, from the ashes of Vanilla Fudge, came Cactus, who pushed the limits of blues rock and released their debut in 1970. Over in New York came Sir Lord Baltimore, who released their proto-metal debut Kingdom Come in December 1970. The band created a stoner rock classic that was probably inspired in part by Black Sabbath, and Sir Lord Baltimore actually opened for Sabbath in 1971. Also out of New York was the heavy-sounding Mountain, fronted by Leslie West, who had a huge hit with Mississippi Queen. The final album that needs to be mentioned is Funhouse by the Stooges. This album is often referenced in both the story of punk and alternative music, and not really in the story of metal. But Iggy Pop, brothers Ron and Scott Ashton, and Dave Alexander, all out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, created one of the most fierce and intense heavy albums of all time. But also, there was Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin released their third album in 1970, and while it opened with a very heavy rocker, The Immigrant Song, most of the album was actually acoustic. All of these artists created music that progressed the heaviness in rock music. However, Black Sabbath was still heavier and more sinister sounding. The texture of the music is significantly darker than any of these other bands. One main factor in creating this sound might be the way that Tony Iommi plays. Due to his damaged fingers, he played more fifths rather than fourths, and that is what maybe allowed Sabbath to create a sound outside the typical rock blues structure. No one was heavier than Sabbath. In the next episode, we are going to look at the next 4 incredible albums that Sabbath would release between 1971 and 75. Remember, Black Sabbath is the most important band in the history of rock. Please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. If you think I'm wrong about Black Sabbath being the most influential band, most important band, please argue with me in the comments. I would look forward to it. Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts.